Hi, everyone. So the methodology that we researched, our group, was interviews and focus groups. A few things we're going to look at in this presentation is the key terminology. We're also going to look at the differences between interviews and focus groups. And then we're going to go on and analyze our findings. And then at the end, we're going to talk about what we the things we noticed in our in our process, in our methodology. So I'm going to start by just looking at a general overview of interviews and focus groups. So an interview is a process where a researcher and a participant engage in conversation. Usually the researcher has a series of questions that they ask the participant to gauge their perception and their views on a certain research topic. And interviews can be performed in many different ways. There are email interviews, there are web interviews, personal interviews, and telephone interviews. Normally, personal interviews are the most common when it comes to using interviews as a research methodology. So a few of the key terminology that comes up when we discuss interviews as a form of data collection are the structure of the interviews. They can be divided in three different ways. There's structured interview, unstructured interview, and semi-structured interview. And the differences are that a structured interview has predetermined questions that the interviewer normally sticks to and asks those exact questions in an exact order to every participant. An unstructured interview is the opposite. The researcher doesn't really have any questions ahead of time, and the interview is really conducted in an informal manner. This may just be, conversation, more of an observation. And then semi-structured is a mixture of the two. In the semi-structured, the researcher has a series of questions to ask, but it's also more flexible in that they're not limited to those questions. The researcher can ask follow-up questions to really gauge a person's understanding and perception of a certain topic. So some of the strengths of interviews are that the questions can be structured in an easy way for the candidates to understand, so there's little confusion in what's being asked. Interviews are more personal in that the researcher and the candidates are just having a conversation, and this opens up answers to be more honest. More candidates are usually more confident when they're answering. And they really steer the course of the interview because it's based on what their responses are to certain questions. And again, this unstructured or semi-structured format also allows the researcher to gauge the answers and make their data more in depth. And then some of the limitations with interviews are that if in a structured setting, if the researcher deviates from the questions by changing the word order or by not following the correct order, that can have an effect on the data. Also, there are errors that occur, such as an interrogation error when the questions change from one candidate to the next. There's an interpretation error that happens when the researcher has to make a subjective sort of judgment when coding and understanding an answer. And then there's a recording error that happens when we're transcribing or when we're collecting the data, and there's a tendency to abbreviate answers so it can influence the data that's collected.
Thank you, Michael. So our group also engaged in the research using the focus group method. The focus group method is a qualitative approach where a group of respondents are interviewed together. And this is used to gain an in-depth understanding of issues. And in our case, it will be issues related to education mostly. The method aims to obtain data from a purposefully selected group of individuals rather than from a statistically representative sample of a broader population. And you can look at the picture, how the focus group is conducted. It's completely opposite to what interview approach is. Here we have a group of people discussing about topics that, and there is a moderator. I will talk more about it in the next slide, please. So there are some kind of similarities and differences between the interview method and the focus group method. The focus group discussion is sometimes seen as synonymous with interviews, especially with the semi-structured one-to-one and group interviews. But interviews involve a one-to-one qualitative and in-depth discussion where the researcher adopts the role of an investigator. Whereas in the focus group discussion, researchers adopt the role of a facilitator or a moderator. This is the basic difference. The interview is conducted by the researcher who is an investigator, and in the focus group, there is a moderator who facilitates the discussion. In this setting, the researcher facilitates or moderates a group of discussion between participants and not between the researcher and the participants. The similarities between these techniques relate to the tendency to uncover people's perceptions and values. Unlike interviews, the researcher thereby takes a peripheral rather than a center stage role in a focus group discussion. So the focus group discussion consists of 4 major steps, which include research design, data collection, analysis, and reporting of the data that we collected. So some of the advantages of the focus group is that a great complement to other mediums like online surveys and online polls. It helps us to collect more data when we are doing research. Focus groups give you access to why someone feels a certain way. And there's immediate access to opinions, making data collection and analysis is quick and convenient in the focus group method. Highly flexible to adapt to the needs and opinions of the group members. It also is easy to conduct regular discussions to eliminate inaccurate results. Focus groups are perfect sources to understand the true feelings and perceptions of your selected target audience. So those are some of the advantages. And let's look at some of the limitations of the focus group method. The composition of the group will depend on the main aim of the research. So it depends on what the research is. You will have those group of participants. The participants should share similar characteristics such as gender, age range, ethnic, and social class background. The main methods of data collection, which could be audio and tape recording, note-taking, and participant observation, presents different advantages and disadvantages, and researchers should consider context-specific issues in selecting a method of data collection. And another limitation is that participants are likely to suffer from fatigue when discussions are longer. Member checking process has been criticized based on epistemological and methodological challenges, as the researchers have the problem of determining what synthesis of data to present to member participants to check. So in the focus group, there is always this challenge of collecting the data and transcribing the data and presenting that information that as as analysis. So that data sometimes may not be accurate. So this is one of the limitations of the focus group method. So the focus group in education, we have seen that the development of learning tools that will appeal to students' interests and needs. This is one area that focus group method is used. And it's also used in the evaluation of students' knowledge or attitudes about curriculum issues, the formulation of new marketing strategies for educational programs, and the enhancement of survey results and education research. So these are some of the areas that focus group method has been used in education.
So our research question is going to be, what led you to be a teacher in your current context? So we're going to be talking about the data and the analysis of both interviews and focus groups. I will start out with interviews, and then Joe will take over and discuss focus groups. So the first question that we asked was, what grade level and content area do you teach? essentially walking into this question, we assume that there could be mixed results and that we're not just going to find one theme in particular grade levels or content areas, because there's so many different things that you can teach. And so the kinds of teachers that we interviewed were EFL students, English as a foreign language, or some of you may be familiar with ESL, English as a second language. We also spoke to homeroom teachers and substitute teachers. The homeroom teachers were teaching in a second grade classroom, and the grade levels varied between grades 1 through 6 and grades K to 5. Locations varied from being in Kuwait, Senegal, Taiwan, and Egypt. The kinds of schools that these teachers worked in are international schools, for-profit schools. This isn't necessarily a type of school, but it is an after-school program and a public school. Overall, these were very diverse and scattered participants. The second question is, why are you teaching in your context currently? These were also scattered. There wasn't a huge specific theme that we found. We just found that one half of our participants were originally teachers. It was their first career choice to become a teacher. And then we had the other half of our participants that ended up taking an alternate route to prior careers. So these are a couple of the different responses that we saw. You can pause it to read more into it. The third question was there someone who influenced you to become a teacher? So overall, we found that the themes that emerged here were that someone had a superhero model teacher that they either aspired to be like and wanted to teach like, or just admired in general. And some of them also got encouraged to teach by either family, friends, or other teachers. But they were all inspired in some way, shape, or form, and a lot of them had teachers that ran in the family. Question 4 was, what challenges or difficulties have you encountered teaching? Because our participants are so diverse and come from different countries, as well as teach different subjects, some of them are homerooms, some of them are substitutes, and some of them are EFL teachers, we couldn't really find a theme that came up, and it also just depended on how many years of experience you had teaching. But here are a couple of them, and they were scattered depending on the location and the level of teaching experience. Question 5, how have your ideas been reinforced or changed? So regarding reinforcement, the amount of care and time and space given to your students. And in regards to changed, it's really that there's not a one-size-fits-all approach to being a teacher. You kind of just have to figure out what recipe, what pieces of teaching that you've learned, like pedagogies and methodologies and different teaching strategies that you find that work best for you. Do you want to include humor in your teaching or not? Is that something you're interested in? And just really understanding the reality of being a teacher.
So, welcome. Now we're going to be diving into the focus group aspect of our research. And our data analysis, these are just some of the demographics of the people that we involved with in our focus group. It consisted of a high school ESL teacher, a middle school teacher, an elementary ESL teacher, as well as a self-contained ESL teacher. And these teachers were all located in New Jersey in the United States. You can see the questions that we had asked, talking about experiences as a teacher, what brought them to their current position, how their views have changed, talking about challenges, and thinking about how they may have had a prior career and how it influenced them in their choice to become a teacher, as well as advice to pre-service or possible people who may be considering becoming a teacher. In answer to the first question, family played a huge role in many of the decisions for our people to become an educator. However, actual experiences in the educational setting led most of the participants into the educational field. These experiences ranged from instructional assistance to coursework that they had experienced in high school. So there was a variety of experiences that led them to becoming teachers. In answer to our second question regarding views about teaching, 2 of the participants are in their first year of teaching, and we discovered that novice teachers are more overwhelmed with classroom preparation and familiarization with curriculum, which fits with, I think, anticipating what would happen for first-year teachers. Also, day-to-day lesson planning and classroom management were two large themes that emerged both with novice teachers as well as established teachers. So finally, in terms of the challenges, teachers found that there was a consensus that support from colleagues and administration was a huge impact on overcoming these challenges. And these challenges consisted of classroom behavior management, as well as familiarizing yourself with the curriculum, as well as the learning scope and sequence for their particular grade, or if they were changing grades. Also, when we looked at the initial place of work people play of work and whether that played a role in bolstering their decision, as we mentioned earlier, some of our teachers had other careers prior to it, and those played a part in eventually finding their way to education. But most of our teachers involved in this particular focus group had teaching in mind at some point in their careers. And finally, when we asked teachers about the advice that they would give to pre-service teachers or someone who's considering becoming a teacher, there was a consensus about being flexible and being patient with yourself as well as your students. Don't let yourself be stressed out by the curriculum, and be sure to take care of yourself and your students, because you can't take care of your students if you're not taking care of yourself. And I know self-care is a huge part of talk in the education field, particularly during these pandemic times. And finally, it was, again, going back to our question about challenges, taking advantage of the support offered by your district and schools. So now we're going to turn it over to Raina, who's going to talk a little bit about our evaluation of interviews as well as focus groups.
So we have a lot of positive responses. As you see, I'm going to read some of them. I like our meeting today. To be honest, it's very therapeutic, and today I learned a lot. You can be inspired and modify your answers based on what other people said versus an interview where it's one-to-one. So as you see here, we have a comparison and evaluation of research method. For interviews, mostly it's very structured. For focus group, it's semi-structured. Interviews, observation and judgments. Focus group has a lot of flexibility. Conversation can get off task. Interviews, participants seemed comfortable. However, pre-interview dialogue may have helped set them more at ease. But for the focus group, participants were comfortable and able to build off one another's responses. Interviews, limited view and scope. For focus group, responses were answered with integrity and honesty. Time consuming for both, allows for elaboration for both. And the role of researcher is to investigate in the interviews, but for focus group, role of researcher is to moderate. We finished our presentation, and thank you so much.